Hello everyone, this is Al Fadi. Welcome back to this series on Mecca. We called it Mecca, the search for a place. And today we are going to build upon all of the arguments that we have been raising concerning the contradiction between the standard Islamic narrative and many of the findings or actual data when it comes to the geographical location or historical documentation and so on and so forth. Today is no exception. We're going to be talking about the Qibla, or the direction of prayers, something that our brother Dan Gibson brought into light years ago in a book that he published. And then later on, of course, we unpacked that in a series in and of itself. And we showed that this research that he has done is absolutely amazing. So it's going to be a quick review for you, but you can always go back and watch the entire series that we did about the Qibla. Welcome back, Jay. And please help our viewers, at least those who don't have an idea about what he did, what Dan did, what is the Qibla and why it's important.
Now, the Qibla is the direction of prayer, as you well know, and it's what has been supported by the standard Islamic narrative as being directed towards Mecca, certainly during the time of Muhammad. Before, Muslims are not going to take a position on that, but what they will say is that the Qibla was standardized around 621 to 624, that time period, and you see it in the Quran in chapter 2, verse 149 and 150, where it doesn't say Mecca, it just says the Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram is attributed to Mecca. Masjid al-Haram would be the Kaaba. So they would say that this was redirected back from Jerusalem down to Mecca. Now, the standard Islamic narrative starts from the premise that the Qibla during the time of Muhammad's movement to Medina, when he went there in 622, was directed towards Jerusalem. And then because of the difficulties he had with the Jews, the Banu Qaynuqa family, the Banu Nadir, the Banu Qurayza family, they would not accept him as their authority. He then gets a new revelation from heaven to redirect the Qibla. And that's chapter 2, verse 149, 450, back to the original Qibla, which would be the Qibla of... The Quran just says Masjid al-Haram, but Muslims attribute that down to Mecca. So 624, let's put that date, 624. If that is the case then, any mosque built after 624, right, should be facing Mecca. Am I correct?
Yep.
Stands to reason.
I mean, that's basically the whole idea behind it.
In fact, we're saying every mosque, because what mosques existed before 624? There weren't any.
Well, I mean, exactly. If there were mosques before, then why do we have an issue now with building a mosque to face a different direction? I mean, it's an admission that they were a different direction before that. Now, even if the argument that it was facing Jerusalem, as you hear, we don't have any support of this notion that the Quran was talking about changing from Jerusalem to Mecca verbatim. It was just talking about a change of direction.
Yeah. So I would suggest that any mosque that we find today should be facing Mecca from 624 on. Dr. David King, who's the world authority on the Qibla, supposedly the world authority in the Qibla, was very clear that all the mosques he looked at, hold on a minute, did he look at any mosques?
I think we just determined it was one mosque.
It's not we determined. He admitted it. He only went to one mosque physically, the Samarkand mosque there in Uzbekistan. That was it. He didn't go to any other mosque but that. And here, yet he is the world authority on it. And he did know, and he was told, but he didn't know that by looking. He didn't know by going there. He actually learned it because the 9th, 10th, and 11th century scholars that he read in a library, he just went to a library, read their books from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century, all said that there were many mosques that were facing hundreds of directions, and the reason why is because they didn't have mathematics. They just didn't know better. They were barbaric. But we, those of us now who have all our mosques by the 9th, 10th, 11th century are now facing Mecca. We know the direction because of mathematics, and that's why we have standardized it. And King just basically said, well, they must know better than me, so that's why they're all facing now Mecca, but not till the 9th, 10th, and 11th century. Right. Dan Gibson was not satisfied with that. He didn't like that. He didn't go to a library. He actually lived for 25 years in situ. He actually went to where the people lived. He went to where they built their mosque, and he went from mosque to mosque to mosque to mosque. 60 to 100 mosques he finally went to personally, and he kept on finding the same thing. They weren't facing hundreds of different directions. They were facing only 4 directions. Remember this? We did a whole series on this, didn't we?
Yes.
Only 4 directions. And if you look and see what those directions are, The first direction, let's go right into it. Well, the first one is right here. This is it. Petra. That was the first Qibla. And all of the mosques in the 7th century, so we're talking about the century that Muhammad lived, the century that Mecca existed. This is the century of Mecca. All the mosques should have been facing Mecca from 624. So this is the century where it was canonized in 624. So we're talking about for the 60 years, they should all been facing Mecca, right?
That's right.
But up until 706, every mosque is facing Petra. Petra's in Jordan. Petra is 600 miles further north. Not one mosque is facing Mecca at all in the 7th century. And then in 706, a new direction came up. This direction is called the in-between direction. Wasit, that's the word, right? Wasit is the first one.
Right.
Take a look right here. There's Wasit right here. That's the first one right there, built by Al-Hajjaj. In fact, he built all of these. These mosques are all attributed to him. These are the ones that he built. Now, what's fascinating, if you take a look and see where they're facing nothing. There's nothing there. There's no town there. There's no mountain there. There's no structure there. There's no body of water there. There's nothing that they could be facing that would stand out. In fact, it's just sand dunes. It's just sand. It's just rocky, barren land, which suggests that the reason they're facing that direction has nothing to do with anything. It has to do with a political statement. And so Gibson put that out there. He must be making a political statement. But what he noticed is the place that they're all directed, as they're all coming in here, the place that they're all directed is exactly halfway between Petra and Mecca. So that means Mecca, which suggests to me, Mecca was known then by 706. Mecca must have been known by 706 to have a direction that's exactly diametrically between these two. Now, you know the reason why they were pointed there. I know the reason, but I'm not going to give the reason yet because we're going to bring that out in another episode yet to come. So that's the second one. So you have two Qiblas, neither of them are facing Mecca. One is facing Petra, the other is halfway between Petra and Mecca. Then a third one, and this is the Qibla we're waiting for. This is the Qibla that should have been the first one. This is the Qibla that David King didn't know about and didn't understand. He just assumed that this was the Qibla from the very beginning. This is the Meccan Qibla, introduced there way over in Banbor. The first one we have is in Banbor in Pakistan. Well, that's hundreds of miles away. They can see, well, maybe thousands of miles away. And that's the very first one. 727 is a date for that mosque. 727. And you see just a very few of them are facing Mecca. What's fascinating is we're going to ask the question whether or not they were very accurate in their directions. Hold on to that question. Mm-hmm. There's still mosques that are still being built after 727 that are still facing Petra and still facing in between. But then a fourth Qibla is introduced. And this one is introduced in 732. And these are the ones in North Africa. Now take a look here. You can see there's North Africa. And also there's one in Cordoba, which is Andalusia. Today it's called Spain. And if you take a look at them, they're not facing Mecca. They're not facing Petra. They're facing a parallel line that would parallel the line between Petra and Mecca. And that's why these are all Dan Gibson's pictures, by the way. These are not my pictures. These are him. I'm using his pictures purposely. I've asked permission from him. He's given me permission. But I'm doing this to show the work that he has done and to give him full credit for this. God bless him for all that he's done. We're going to be actually working with him in the future, aren't we? In fact,
right. Yep.
He's asked for us to come and help them out for a whole new series because he realizes that in some ways, we've popularized him so well all over the world because we've done it on your YouTube site, you've done it on my site, Sierra International and Fander Films. But back to this, take a look at this. So this starts to be introduced in 732. So you're talking about roughly 5 years after the Meccan Qibla is introduced, then this Qibla. Obviously, either they did not know their direction or they were not very good at traveling, but these people could travel hundreds and thousands of miles. In fact, what we do know, these continue right up into the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyads were going to Mecca. They were still going. It's not that they didn't know where Mecca was. They certainly knew if they could get there, and they can get there by camelback, they certainly knew exactly where Mecca was. So why is it that they continue all the way up until the 9th century, they're still building parallel mosques? This is long after Mecca now had been canonized as the Qibla. Obviously, this is another political statement.
Again, longer, time and further geographical areas. Same theme. Far geographically, longer in time.
Longer in time, far
or
geographically.
Later in time,
But in this case, this is because they have a problem with both Petra and Mecca. So let's look, here's the review, and this is from his book as well, this part up here. If you look at his book, he says that all the Qiblas were facing towards Petra up until 706. There was a confusion for the next 100 plus years. Actually, I would say it goes up to almost 200 years if you're talking about the 9th century. 17 are facing Petra. 8 are that in between that Al-Hajjaj instituted in 706. 10 are facing Mecca, which begins in 727. 6 are parallel, which continues right up until 866. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876. After 8, that's the late 9th century. It takes up all the way to the late 9th century to finally have every mosque facing Mecca, which they are today. So all the mosques today are facing Mecca. Now, if you're talking about 876, that's 250 years too late if we start with Muhammad and 624 all the way up to there. But let's go back to David King's argument, because David King was very clear that the reason why they didn't face is because they just didn't know their mathematics. And it was only finally the Meccans who finally had the best mathematics. We now have the most accurate. The implication, and he said this very clearly, is that all those that came before the Meccan Qibla were off by huge degrees. Because until they had their mathematics correct, there's no way they could be accurate. Well, let's ask that question, and let's see if that is correct. Let's go back to David King again. Sorry, let's go back to Dan Gibson again. Go back to his book. Which Qiblas are the most accurate? Well, look up there. You can see 17 ones that are in Petra. They are 2.9 degrees of accuracy. If you take out, and here I just want to look at, take a look at this picture over here that I'm pointing to over here on the right. That's a picture looking down at all the trajectory lines from all the Qiblas, the 17 Qiblas. If you look at all those trajectory lines, those red lines coming in, and look at the circle that goes around Petra, that circle is 34 miles in diameter. Here you are hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, if you're going all the way from Sherman in Kerala. If you're going to what we call Canton today, Guangzhou is the Chinese name for it, way over in China, and you come in to look, you can see that all of them, except for these two here, are within 34 miles radius, thousands of miles away. Now, that's pretty accurate, wouldn't you say?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, at least it's in the direction or the vicinity of that area.
Absolutely. When we get to the between mosques, they are even more accurate. But then the between mosques are very much closer to that between point.
Right.
The Petran ones are much, much, much further away. So there's an awful lot more chance for them to be inaccurate. Fascinating, the between mosques are 0.98 degrees accurate. That's less than a degree off. The parallel mosques, there's 6 of them, they're 3.5 degrees accuracy, and that can be understood because they're much further away. They're over in North Africa and up in Cordoba in Andalusia. But the Meccan mosques, the 10 that he has found from this early time period that are facing Mecca, they're 4.78 degrees accuracy. They're the least accurate. They're less accurate than either the Petra, the Mecca, the Petra, the between, or the parallel mosques. So the Meccan mosques are the worst. So this whole argument that mathematics actually helped them flies out the window. And Dan Gibson saying, no. You need, for heaven's sakes, look at the categories, but look at where they're facing, and then use GPS. If you use GPS, you can just pretty much throw this argument out and throw that and destroy it. And that's what David King never did. He didn't use any of this equipment. In fact, he derided it. He says, why are we using modern equipment to answer this question? Well, because you want to find the answer. The best way to find the answer is use what's best you have available at your disposition. And in this case, they had GPS availability. They had the Astra satellites that are put up there in space by Japanese Astra satellites that can find the direction and find a pinpoint that was within 25 feet. That's how accurate it is from space. And that's why he was able to come up with these type of figures, this type of material. And that's something that I don't think David King even today knows. He has no idea of what Dan Gibson has done. And we have to just thank Dan Gibson. 25 years working in the deserts, learning the languages, living amongst the Bedouins, and for heaven's sakes, doing what David King should have done, going to every one of these mosques. And basically asking the question that David King should have asked. And to hear David King go on and on about this guy doesn't have credentials, he didn't study under me, he doesn't have a degree, as if that makes much sense. What's the purpose of a degree if you're just going to sit in a library all your life?
That's right.
Why don't you actually go to these mosques? Why didn't he actually get these categories? Why didn't he look at the measurements? Why didn't he use modern Aster satellites? And why didn't he use GPS coordination? And why didn't he look at the curvature of the earth when he did his calculations to find out exactly where they're pointing? Because what Dan King, I'm getting the names mixed up now. What Dan Gibson was able to do was what David King could not do. But then the question needs to be asked. So why in the world were none of these mosques facing Mecca? And why then, when they finally do face Mecca, are they so inaccurate? We're going to answer that, because this now comes into this whole paradigm of what Mecca became and what Mecca was. We're going to be answering that in yet an episode, so I don't want to steal the thunder from that.
Amen.
Back to you.
Thank you so much. And this is, by the way, everyone, why this direction of prayer and so-called Qibla is so important. We unpacked this in a previous video series that we did together, me and Jay. But really, if you want to know more about this, you can also access or buy the book by Dan Gibson called Early Islamic Qibla. And that's with a Q. Q-I-B as in boy, L-A, Early Islamic Qibla by Dan Gibson. Brother, I guess next time we are going to talk now about some of the other theories about the trade route and the idea that Mecca was such an important commerce center that all the trade routes went through it. And
we talked about Dan Gibson. Now we're going to go to Patricia Corona, my good friend Patricia Corona, and see what she did with Montgomery Watt's theory on the trade route. We're going to unpack that one. We're going to be looking at some graphs. We're just going to follow a map, and we're going to show you that when you look at history, for heaven's sakes, make sure that you go back to the right history and ask the right questions. Something Montgomery Watt didn't do, something the Muslims haven't done, and something that we haven't done until Patricia Corona finally decided that she would do it for us.
That is true. Thank you so much. And everyone, hopefully you're enjoying this series. Until we meet again next time, this is Al-Fadi. Have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, Sira International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.